Judge smirks at black woman in court, then freezes when she pulls out her FBI badge. I still remember the tension in that courtroom, thick enough to slice with a knife. My heart pounded against my chest as I locked eyes with the judge, a broad-shouldered man, wearing a faint, condescending smirk. A hush hovered among the spectators, and even my own breath felt like it needed permission to escape. That moment carried centuries of prejudice and whispered assumptions, all threatening to smother me beneath their collective weight. Yet I stood tall, shoulders back, hands steady. I was ready to unleash a truth few had anticipated. The judge's smirk said it all. He believed I was powerless. Little did he know that my next move would erase every shred of his certainty. Before we dive in, if you're new here, don't forget to subscribe and hit that notification bell so you never miss an update. If you're excited about this story, let us know. Your feedback really inspires me to gather more uplifting and meaningful stories. The courtroom's unsteady air. I arrived early that morning. The echo of my formal shoes tapping against the polished marble floors preceded me down the corridor. My name is Ava Sinclair. No, not the British actress, though I've heard the jokes and references my entire life. I'm Ava Sinclair, an American attorney newly minted and perhaps far too eager to throw myself into the legal battlefield of our justice system. On that brisk Tuesday, I was about to represent my client in a pre-trial hearing for a case nobody thought was winnable. Yet something spurred me on, an energy pulsing beneath my rib cage that insisted I walk faster, talk louder, and stand prouder. The courtroom doors looked intimidating, tall and wooden, crowned with an imposing brass crest. Each step I took forward made my stomach flutter. Beyond those doors a world of tradition, influence, and power awaited, one that was rarely keen on letting women, especially black women, wield too much authority. But I was determined. As I opened the heavy door, the typical hush inside the courtroom settled upon me like a layer of dust, reminding me to hear every single piece of dust had a story. My story, I hoped, would be one of great triumph. I scanned the crowd for my client, a timid young woman named Sophia, who had been earlier indicted for an alleged assault on a local councilman's nephew. Anyone who'd done even the bare minimum of investigating knew the charges were suspect, but progress in the justice system often crawls at a snail's pace, especially when the parties involved wield significant social and financial resources. There was hush and expectation in the air, the typical tension that arises whenever a new face appears at the defendant's table. In one of the front rows, I noticed a woman who had hired me, Sophia's older sister Camille. She offered a supportive smile, though shadows of worry etched her face. As we exchanged a nod, I felt a gentle ripple of determination roll through me. This was how my mother must have felt whenever she fought to prove her rightful place in an environment that sneered at her background or gender. I carry that legacy proudly. Taking my seat at the counsel's table, I spread my notes carefully in front of me. The case file was thicker than any I had handled before, and I couldn't help but question if my relative inexperience might be a liability. But self-doubt wasn't going to feed the bulldog, as my grandfather used to say, so I straightened my posture. You're here now, I told myself, so own it. A glimpse of the judge before proceedings began. I observed the bench. The judge, whose nameplate read, the Honorable Henry Whitmore, sat perched in a large leather chair. He wore the customary black robe with a crisp white shirt peeking out beneath. His hair was silver at the temples. He had an angular face, but it was his eyes that struck me, sharp, almost hawk-like. They scanned the room with a certain aloofness. It felt as though he was trying to spot any vulnerability among the attorneys who had misfortune of appearing before him. I had heard rumors about Judge Whitmore. He was known to be fiercely intelligent, uncompromising, and, if the gossip was to be believed, occasionally dismissive of younger counsel, particularly those he deemed inexperienced. As a brand-new defense attorney, fresh from passing the bar, I clearly fell into that category. Bailiffs hovered along the side walls, their polished badges gleaming under the fluorescent lights. The clerk, a young man with a neat side-part haircut, arranged papers on the desk and tapped official-looking stamps. Rows of anxious people filled the galley, whispering about everything from traffic violations to potential plea bargains. Overhead a large, insignia-laden American flag hung, occasionally rustling in the air currents from a ventilation system. A formality-laced hush settled in as the clock's second hand ticked closer to the hour. My hands trembled slightly, and I took a breath to steady my nerves. Sophia's hearing might not be the marquee event of the day, but in my world it might as well have been the trial of the century. Normally these preliminaries run quickly, but in my world it might as well have been the trial of the century. Normally these preliminaries run quickly, but I felt like I had the weight of centuries of unjust systems pressing on my chest. Then the clerk signaled for us all to rise as Judge Whitmore made his entrance. He stepped in, black robe flowing behind him, and took his seat with subtle air of practiced grandeur. When I saw that tiny, almost imperceptible smirk tug at the corner of his mouth, my heart skipped a beat. It was a smirk that said, "Show me what you got, rookie." I doubt it's much. I refused to lose my composure. After the clerk read out the docket number, I stated my name for the record, and the hearing was underway. But the judge barely even glanced at me. Instead, he focused on the prosecutor, a seasoned man named Logan Barrett. With a slick tie and a briefcase stuffed full of every law reference known to man, I willed my voice to remain steady when the judge finally acknowledged me. Having faced microaggressions in my life, I recognized a look in Whitmore's eyes, calculated disregard. The prosecution's overreach once formalities concluded, Barrett launched into his arguments like a well-rehearsed performance. "Your Honor, we have evidence that Miss Sophia Mercer assaulted the victim, Derek Vaughn, outside a downtown cafe on the night of May 3rd. We have eyewitness testimony, medical reports, security footage, everything we need to move forward to trial." I resisted the urge to roll my eyes at his dramatics. Yes, Barrett was good at his job, but that didn't give him carte blanche to exaggerate. Holding my pen daintily between my fingers, I scribbled notes and reminded myself to remain silent until it was time to speak. Among the many lessons you learn in law school is that interrupting a flamboyant attorney mid-performance can sometimes backfire, especially if the judge is partial to tradition and etiquette. Your Honor, I urge the court to consider that this was not just a petty argument. This was a violent confrontation, leading to significant injuries for Mr. Vaughn. The prosecution is prepared to show that Miss Mercer harbored ill will toward Mr. Vaughn. I move that bail be denied. Inwardly, I scoffed at his push for no bail. Mr. Vaughn's injuries were described in medical records as surface-level abrasions and a possible sprain. Hardly the stuff of catastrophic harm. But Barrett hammered the point home with the theatrical passion of a Shakespearean actor. If I had known better, I might have believed Miss Mercer had nearly fatally wounded Mr. Vaughn. Finally, Barrett concluded his soliloquy. Judge Whitmore turned to me, arms folded, the same dismissive curve to his lips. "Miss Sinclair, do you have anything to add?" The condescending emphasis he placed on my name, like it was funny that Ava Sinclair was my name, didn't go unnoticed by me or presumably by anyone else in courtroom. Standing up, I forced a smile and approached the podium. My chest felt tight, but I reminded myself that I had every right to stand there. "Your Honor, Mrs. Mercer has no prior criminal history. She's lived in this community her entire life, works 2 jobs, volunteers at a local shelter, and has strong ties to this district. We intend to present substantial evidence proving my client acted in self-defense, and there is reason to believe the so-called victim statement is riddled with inconsistencies. I ask that bail be set at a reasonable amount so Miss Mercer may continue her responsibilities until trial." Whitmore's eyes bored into mine. He sucked in his cheeks, but said nothing for a brief moment. Then he turned, typed a few notes on a computer, and responded, "Bail is set at $25,000. It was high in my opinion, but at least it wasn't a denial. My shoulders eased a fraction. Sophia, standing next to me in a wrinkled blouse, squeezed my hand in gratitude. The lingering smirk me in a wrinkled blouse, squeezed my hand in gratitude. The lingering smirk. After the hearing wrapped, I gathered my notes and watched Judge Whitmore exit the courtroom. His black robe fluttered behind him, and just before he disappeared through his chamber's door, he graced me with that condescending smirk again. It felt designed to cut through any confidence I might have gained, warning me that I was out of my league. I tried to brush it off. After all, I'd faced worse forms of prejudice and intimidation in the past, yet something about that particular moment lodged in my chest, a thorn I couldn't ignore. The smirk told me, "You might convince me for now, but don't forget who holds a gavel." But I came from people who never forgot their own strength, no matter how heavy the gavel weighed. It made me wonder if that smirk was habit, or if it was personal. Exiting the building, I noticed the early morning sun had crawled higher in the sky, illuminating the stone pillars out front. The hustle and bustle of daily courthouse life formed a chaotic chorus around me. I found a quiet corner near the steps and closed my eyes, letting the breeze carry away some of my tension. Mom would laugh in his face, I thought, smiling at the memory of her brazen attitudes toward condescending authority figures. But a few unsavory rumors about Whitmore flitted through my head, specifically that he had a pattern of giving minimal eye contact to female attorneys, and that lawyers of color often got the sharpest edge of his sarcasm. Perhaps it was just gossip, but after seeing that patronizing grin, I suspected otherwise. A trickle of anger began to burn in me. Not a wild, uncontrolled blaze, but a steady, simmering flame that might be used to forge steel. Maybe this was the impetus I needed. I made a silent vow. I will return to this courtroom, and I will not just ask for respect. I will demand it. He can smirk all he wants, but the truth will stand taller than any condescension. With juvenile confidence, I headed down the long stone steps, wishing I could skip time forward to see the day we would prove Sophia's innocence. Little did I know that day would come sooner than I expected, and would unfold in ways that would go far beyond a mere hearing. It was an exposed not just a deep-rooted bias, but an entangled network of secrets that reached far beyond that courthouse. Shifting tides. Barely a week had passed when I received urgent news that Sophia's pre-trial conference had been abruptly moved up. Camille's worried voice over the phone had cracked as she informed me. The court called. They said the judge has a scheduling conflict, so he's advanced the date. Is that a bad sign, Miss Sinclair? I tried to reassure her that, while surprising, it wasn't necessarily dire. Judges do shuffle their calendars sometimes. However, something in my gut told me this was odd, especially for a judge who seemed rather put off by my presence. Regardless, I had prepared. I pored over every shred of evidence, interviewed potential witnesses, and tried to poke holes in the prosecution's case. The more I dug, the more suspicious Mr. Vaughn has claimed became. There appeared to be significant gaps and contradictions in the timeline. The second hearing day arrived, even more frenetic than the first. The corridors bustled with attorneys scurrying from one courtroom to another, juggling case files and trying not to trip in their haste. I found Sophia sitting in the corner of the antechamber, eyes rimmed in red. She confessed quietly that she hadn't been able to sleep. "I can't believe any of this, Mrs. Sinclair. I didn't assault Jack. We argued, sure, but it never got violent." Her words cracked with desperation. He's lying about all of it. Why would they believe him? I assured her, "We're going to get to the bottom of this. I promise. No matter how intimidating that judge seems, we'll make him see the truth." She gave a small nod, swallowing hard. When the bailiff called our case, we proceeded into the courtroom. Judge Whitmore, perched behind a bench, remained stoic. As soon as I stated my appearance for the record, I noticed the slightest twitch at the corners of his mouth. The smirk was there, but tempered. Maybe the judge was feeling the pressure of a more public audience. Sometimes these preliminary hearings are mere formalities, but on that day the gallery was filled with curious onlookers, some local activists who suspected racial bias, local reporters bored with city council politics, and even a handful of law students. Their presence seemed to place a subtle restraint on Whitmore. After the routine recitations, Barrett took the floor again. He hammered on the idea that Mrs. Mercer was a menace, and that the court shouldn't be swayed by her volunteer work or her well-rehearsed tears. My blood boiled at the insinuation that Sophia's genuine fear was all for show. Still, I sat composed, carefully noting every instance of exaggeration, waiting for my turn. Whitmore nodded along with Barrett's statements, occasionally making a note. Then he turned toward me. "Miss Sinclair, if you wish to proceed with a motion to dismiss, now's the time, though I don't see how that's likely with the weight of evidence presented. But by all means enlighten me." A ripple of anger cut through me. The matter-of-fact way he dismissed my entire defense before I'd even opened my mouth angered me more than Barrett's theatrics. But I drew a deep breath and explained, calmly yet firmly, the glaring inconsistencies I'd uncovered. I pointed out the contradictory timestamps, the improbable eyewitness account that contradicted the cafe surveillance footage. Each time I tried to articulate a nuance, Whitmore's expression flickered with mild disinterest, as though my words were background noise. I concluded with conviction, Your Honor, ignoring this mountain of contradictions denies Miss Mercer her constitutional right to a fair hearing. I urge you to reconsider the motion to dismiss, or at the very least to set a more reasonable bail. Sighing, Whitmore tapped his pen on the bench. Then he said, Motion to dismiss is denied. Next issue. That was it. No acknowledgement of the specifics. No mention of the glaring holes. Nothing. Another smirk, barely contained, confirmed what I feared. He was not truly listening. The hearing concluded with only a marginal reduction in Sophia's bail. Deflated, I gathered my files, feeling the weight of the system that often seems stacked against us. I could sense the tension in the room, the unspoken question from onlookers. Why is a judge so dismissive? I walked out determined, if not more aware of the uphill climb. Little did I know that soon a single twist of fate would completely flip the power dynamic in that courtroom. A surprise ally. Fate can be unpredictable. I found that out the next evening, when after a day of rummaging through legal documents, I decided to unwind at a dimly lit bar near the courthouse. It was a place frequented by overworked lawyers and law enforcement officers. A subtle blend of suits, ties, and half-empty beer glasses scattered across chipped wooden tables. I took a seat at the bar's far corner, wanting solitude yet not wanting to be left alone with my anxious thoughts. As I sipped my drink, I noticed a taller woman with an athletic build enter the bar. Her presence was commanding. Though she wore casual clothes, a simple leather jacket and dark jeans, she scanned the room, and for a moment I thought she settled her gaze on me. Then she made her way toward the stool next mine. Long day? She asked, offering a polite nod. Her voice carried the controlled cadence of someone used to confrontation. You have no idea, I replied, curiosity piqued by her confident aura. She introduced herself as Agent Victoria Hale. I gathered she was with the FBI, though she didn't immediately volunteer which branch or task force. We fell into light conversation about the legal environment in the city, the local courthouse, and the difficulties faced by those who seek justice within it. She empathized when I mentioned judges that seemed set in their ways. And that was enough for me to let out some carefully phrased frustration about Judge Whitmore. Nothing unethical, just a subtle allusion to how he brushed me off, and how it seemed to happen often if he didn't match his preconceived notion of a worthy attorney. To my surprise, she smirked, but hers was different. It wasn't condescension, it was a conspiratorial grin that suggested we shared an inside joke. Maybe Whitmore's in for a rude awakening, Agent Victoria Hale said cryptically. When I asked what she meant, she merely shrugged and changed the topic to the city's best diners and coffee spots. Eventually we parted ways, yet I left with a distinct impression that something bigger was at play, a curious turn of events. The next pre-trial hearing date arrived, unseasonably warm for a late fall morning. My client Sophia was running late due to a traffic snarl, which only heightened my nerves. As I hurried into the courtroom, the same hush fell upon me. Judge Whitmore was already seated, leafing through documents. That same hawkish gaze, that same mild smirk. Suddenly the doors in the back of the courtroom swung open. A woman in a sleek black suit entered, her posture exuding authority. I recognized her as Agent Victoria Hale, though she appeared far more official than our first meeting at the bar. She wasn't alone. Another agent followed closely behind, similarly dressed and scanning the room with quiet vigilance. The bailiff looked perplexed, and so did the clerk. No one had been expecting FBI presence at a routine hearing about an alleged assault, yet here they were. My eyes darted from Agent Victoria Hale to Judge Whitmore. For the first time, I saw an unmistakable flicker of uncertainty cross his face. It seemed he was trying to decipher what the FBI wanted with his courtroom. Logan Barrett, the prosecutor, looked equally clueless. A tense silence gripped the room as everyone tried to figure out who would speak first. Finally, Whitmore cleared his throat. Agents, can I help you with something? This is a municipal hearing, not a federal case. Agent Victoria Hale stepped forward, producing a file from her slim briefcase. "Respectfully, Your Honor, I am here on official business. We request to address the court regarding an ongoing federal investigation. It pertains to the alleged victim, Derek Vaughn, as well as potential improprieties in the local justice process." The entire courtroom seemed to collectively hold its breath. Even I felt my heart race with confusion and tingling hope. What improprieties? And how did it relate to my case? A creeping sense of validation stirred in me. Maybe Sophia's predicament was part of a larger puzzle. As Victoria Hale spoke, I watched the judge's face pale slightly. He attempted to keep his composure, but the undercurrent of tension was impossible to ignore. He motioned for the bailiff to bring a microphone to Agent Victoria Hale. In all my days of law school and brief stints in courtroom practice, I had never witnessed federal agents crash a local hearing like this. Ignoring confusion swirling around her, Agent Victoria Hale read from her file, detailing suspicion of collusion between Mr. Vaughn and certain city officials. The alleged plan involved fabricating assault allegations to cover up a more extensive illicit scheme, and that was just the tip of the iceberg. The case, it seemed, had ramifications that could shake local politics to its core. Still, Whitmore managed to maintain a veneer calm and told her, "Very well, we'll note your request. However, I'm uncertain how this directly pertains to the hearing at hand. If you wish to file a motion to intervene, you'll need the proper paperwork." His tone was clipped, though not as dismissive as usual. That self-assured smirk had vanished, replaced by a forced neutrality, which told me that he was unsettled. Before she stepped away, Agent Victoria Hale turned to me and gave a faint nod, as if to acknowledge that more was to come. In that moment I realized we had an unexpected ally in the FBI. When the hearing continued, it was clear the dynamic had shifted. Whitmore was off balance, and even Barrett faltered in his overarching confidence. Sophia arrived midway through, apologetic and bewildered by the scene. I smiled to myself. The script had certainly changed. Murky waters. With the FBI's odd intrusion hovering like a storm cloud, suspicion began to swirl around every corner of the courthouse. Whispers flew about corrupt local officials, shady backroom deals, and how Judge Whitmore might be entangled in it all. Although no open allegations were directed at him, the tension suggested that the Federal Bureau of Investigation wasn't limiting its scope to just Mr. Vaughn. When news of potential improprieties linked to the city council and a judge spread, everyone grew guarded. In hallways, lawyers and clerks murmured in hushed voices about who might be indicted next. Barrett denied any wrongdoing and insisted the rumors were an attempt to derail his case. Whitmore tried to run his court as usual, but a subtle tremor of worry seemed to taint his verdicts, making him appear half-hearted. Meanwhile, I threw myself deeper into investigating Sophia's matter, suspecting that her entire ordeal was a puzzle piece in a larger conspiracy. The more I dug into Derek Vaughn's background, the more I discovered questionable transactions, an unusual deposit into his account just days before the alleged assault, and correspondences with individuals known for less than legal dealings. I compiled everything, determined to incorporate it into our defense. When I tried to present these findings at the next hearing, Barrett objected strenuously, labeling my evidence irrelevant and speculative. Judge Whitmore looked narrow-eyed at me, but for once he hesitated before shutting me down. That petty smirk made a brief cameo, quickly masked by a more thoughtful expression. Perhaps he was concerned about how it might look if he railroaded a defense that might be tangentially connected to an FBI investigation. In any event, I was granted more latitude than in previous hearings, and that small shift felt like a major victory. I was granted more latitude than in previous hearings, and that small shift felt like a major victory. Afterwards, as I packed my files, Whitmore dismissed the court, but lingered at the bench. I saw him cast a quick glance in my direction. I half expected him to say something to me, but the moment vanished when a group of bailiffs approached him with more urgent matters. I left the courtroom that day with a renewed sense of possibility, yet also felt an undercurrent of risk. If powerful forces were at play, I needed to tread carefully. The looming confrontation. About 2 weeks later, the tension had reached a boiling point. Word on the street was that the FBI was close to making arrests in connection with multiple fraudulent activities implicating politicians, a local business tycoon, and possibly a legal figure. Meanwhile, Sophia's case was scheduled for a final pre-trial motion hearing. I was ready, meticulously organizing every piece of exculpatory evidence, certain we would prove Sophia's innocence. That morning I arrived extra early, the city still blanketed in darkness. I sat up in the attorney room near the courtroom, sipping stale coffee and reviewing final notes. The corridors were unusually quiet, an eerie calm before the day's storm. At precisely 8:45 a.m., I heard multiple footsteps approach. When I peered out, I caught a glimpse of Agent Victoria Hale and two other agents heading into a side room. My pulse quickened. Something was about to go down. Not long after, the corridor came alive. Lawyers, clerks, and reporters swarmed, drawn by the smell of a big story brewing. Cameras flashed whenever someone spotted an FBI jacket. Sophia arrived with Camille, both looking apprehensive yet hopeful. We exchanged greetings, and I assured them we were ready for whatever the day held. When the doors to the courtroom opened, the audience poured in. This was supposed to be a routine hearing, but every seat was taken. The clerk called the case, and Sophia and I stepped forward. Across from us, Barrett flashed a confident smile, but it seemed forced. The judge entered, and for a moment he surveyed the chaotic crowd. Cameras weren't allowed in the courtroom, but plenty of journalists scribbled notes, forming an unusual scene for what should have been a minor hearing. I could practically feel Whitmore's pulse from across the room. He looked rattled but tried to maintain a stoic facade. He cleared his throat, and we got underway. Barrett started by reiterating the allegations, but his typical bravado was missing. Then it was my turn. I argued passionately about how the evidence pointed to a setup, how Sophia's supposed connection to Vaughn was fabricated, and how we suspected that this entire case was an extension of a larger corruption. As I spoke, I noticed Whitmore's mouth tighten. In previous hearings, he might have cut me off. Now, he actually let me finish, just as I pivoted to present new, conclusive evidence. The courtroom doors flung open with a loud bang. In marched Agent Victoria Hale and two other FBI agents. Ripples of gasp spread to the crowd. Whitmore's face went pale as a sheet. The bailiff tried to intercept. "Agents, you need to wait outside until..." But Victoria Hale brushed them off. She stepped up to the rail, locked eyes with Whitmore, and spoke with calm authority. "Your Honor, my team and I have come to serve warrants and to detain individuals implicated in an ongoing federal investigation." The tension could have ignited the entire room. Everyone froze. Whitmore stammered, "In the middle of my courtroom. This is highly irregular. We can't just..." But Victoria Hale wasn't listening to him anymore. Instead, she locked her gaze on Logan Barrett. "Mr. Barrett, you are under arrest of conspiracy to commit fraud and obstruction of justice." A deafening hush fell, then exploded in gasps and frantic scribbling by reporters. Two agents moved forward and instructed Barrett, stuttering with confusion, to place his hands behind his back. He shouted in protest. Cameras snapped from a hallway beyond the open doors. The judge's eyes were wide in shock. This was unprecedented. I saw the smirk attempt to quiver on his face, but it fizzled into an expression of raw alarm. Then Agent Victoria Hale lifted a single sheet of paper. "We have a warrant for the immediate confiscation of any relevant documents in her chambers, Your Honor. We suspect there's been collusion in multiple cases, including the matter at hand." She gestured at me and Sophia. At that statement, the entire court seemed to spin. Whitmore's jaw hung partially open, stunned. He tried to speak, but he only managed a few sputtered defenses before Agent Victoria Hale made her move. "The badge revelation, Your Honor," Victoria Hale said firmly. "We understand you colluded with Mr. Vaughn and others. We have reason to believe you intentionally influenced rulings in this courtroom. For that reason, we also have a warrant for your arrest." Silence crashed upon us like a wave. Whitmore's face turned crimson. He opened his mouth, turned to the bailiffs, and tried to maintain authority. "You can't do this. I'm a sitting judge. This is a travesty. Officer, bailiff, remove these people at once." But no one moved. The bailiff's face was etched with uncertainty. He probably never imagined the day he would have to pick sides between a federal agent and the judge paying his salary. Meanwhile, the crowd couldn't believe what they were witnessing. Some pressed forward to see better. Others tried to hide their shock behind notepads. Judge Whitmore, Victoria Hale continued, her voice unwavering. I strongly advise you accompany us peacefully to avoid further complications. She reached into her blazer, producing her official FBI badge. Its golden gleam seemed to freeze Whitmore in place. At that instant, everything slowed down, the shocked expression on the judge's face, the triumphant glint in Victoria Hale's eyes, the flurry of phone cameras snapping pictures. Even from my vantage point, the tension was tangible. And that's when it happened. The judge tried to smirk. The corners of his mouth twitched upward, but it was an empty gesture. His entire body stiffened, as though the reality of the badge pointing at him was too much to bear. He was no longer the unassailable figure behind the bench. Now he stood exposed, vulnerable before an authority even greater than his. Agents, this is an outrage, Whitmore muttered, still trying to preserve some semblance of dignity. You'll never make these charges stick. Agent Victoria Hale clicked her cuffs. We'll see, Your Honor. For now, I suggest you cooperate. We already have an ongoing investigation with multiple pieces of evidence linking you to questionable financial transactions and suspicious rulings that favored Mr. Vaughn and his associates. As the agents approached Whitmore, I saw the last vestige of his arrogant smirk vanish entirely. I recalled all those times he'd sneer at me as though my words were worthless. Now he stared at me across the courtroom. He, ironically, the one in need of mercy, though part of me felt vindicated. The bigger part was anxious. This was more massive than anything I had predicted. Assisted by the FBI, Sophia was formally cleared, right there in the courthouse, amid the chaos. Agent Victoria Hale announced that new evidence demonstrated the entire assault charge was fabricated, orchestrated to damage her credibility in an ongoing zoning dispute that threatened a real estate mogul connected to Mr. Vaughn. Sophia's face lit with relief, tears flooding her eyes. The crowd erupted, reporters yelling questions, bystanders exclaiming in disbelief. Meanwhile, the judge was let out of his own courtroom, flanked by federal agents. Deathly silence followed in their wake, aftermath and reflection. In the days that followed, the entire city buzzed with news coverage of Judge Whitmore's arrest. Headlines declared, corrupt judge exposed in shocking courtroom drama, and FBI swoops in, shaking foundations of local law. The scandal only expanded. More council members, a few business executives, and even some lesser-known attorneys fell under suspicion. Sophia was officially exonerated. The city prosecutor's office dropped all charges. I held a press conference with her and Camille, explaining how the FBI had uncovered a vile network of corruption that had employed false charges, intimidation, and blackmail to silence people who interfere with their shady deals. Sophia, by sheer bad luck, had gotten on their radar after a volunteer group. She was part threatened to expose unethical construction practices in a city contract. Amid the swirl of cameras, interviews, and national attention, my life changed. No longer was I the inexperienced attorney that Judge Whitmore had dismissed with a smirk. My phone rang off the hook with prospective clients. Strangers approached me in public to congratulate me on my perseverance. Even some of my old law professors reached out, beaming with pride that an Ava Sinclair from their alumni list had made headlines, though they admitted to occasionally conflating me with the actress. Yet I couldn't shake the emotional weight of it all. What stuck with me was a raw expression on Whitmore's face as he realized he had no power to dismiss Agent Victoria Hale's badge. In that moment, the entire false hierarchy he had relied upon crumbled. His forced grin vanished into fear, a fear that perhaps every powerless defendant feels when stepping into a bias-laden system. There was a painful irony in that, and it made me reflect deeply on the nature of justice. Looking back, I recognized that day in court was more than just a sensational twist of fate, more than an astonishing scene where a haughty judge found himself cornered by an FBI agent. For me, it illuminated the cracks in our system, how prejudice can silence voices, how the powerful can manipulate the law, and how assumed authority can dissolve in a matter of seconds once truth enters a room. Sometimes it takes an extraordinary event, like the unveiling of an FBI badge, to strip pretenses and make everyone see the naked truth. But it shouldn't have to be that way. Our justice system must function honestly even without the dramatic flourish of federal intervention. Until that day comes, we as citizens are all responsible for speaking out against injustice and holding each other accountable. Throughout these events, I experienced a surge of conflicting emotions: vindication, relief, anger how easily Sophia's life was almost ruined, and renewed hope that there are good people like Age of Victoria Hale, working behind the scenes to bring truth to light. In the end, the smirk on that judge's face was not just a personal slight against me. It was a symbol of something far bigger, an arrogance that thrives when good people remain silent. I cannot help but see parallels in many other corners of society, where those with power dismiss, degrade, or discriminate against those they consider lesser. But I also notice more people than ever are uncovering hidden injustices and making their voices heard.